taught her how to read, the law said that was a crime. In 1852, in a small town in South Carolina, a white man risked prison for teaching an enslaved girl how to read, not to help her escape, not to make money, but because he loved her, and because she asked him a question one night that would not leave his mind. What does freedom look like on paper? That question sounds simple, almost innocent, but in the American South of the 1850s, it was explosive because freedom was not just a feeling. It was written into laws, printed in newspapers, debated in state houses, signed on documents. And if you could not read those documents, you could not even see the shape of the cage around you. After revolts like the one led by Nat Turner in 1831, fear hardened into law across the South. Legislators passed strict statutes making it illegal to teach enslaved people to read or write. They believed literacy would lead to thought. Thought would lead to questions. Questions would lead to resistance. And resistance threatened everything. This is a story of Clara and Thomas. And this time, love did not hide in swamps or run through forests under moonlight. It hid inside books. It flickered in candlelight. It moved quietly between letters. And it changed two lives forever. To understand what happened between Clara and Thomas, you have to understand the world they lived in. South Carolina in 1852 was tense. Cotton profits were strong, but political arguments were louder than ever. The nation was arguing with itself. Newspapers printed speeches about states' rights and abolition. The Compromise of 1850 was still fresh in public memory. The Fugitive Slave Act had made even the North uneasy. In Charleston, educated young men debated philosophy and law. In rural towns, merchants measured success in barrels and bales. And in kitchens, fields, and back rooms, enslaved people moved silently through lives that were not their own. Clara was born into that silence. She did not know the exact year of her birth. Records for people like her were not kept carefully. She guessed she was 17 in 1852. She had grown up in the merchant household. Her mother had worked there before her. Clara's world was small but observant. She memorized the rhythm of the house. When the front door opened, when the father cleared his throat before speaking, when the son returned from town with newspapers tucked under his arm, she learned to read people, but she could not read paper. That fact weighed on her more heavily each year. When guests gathered for dinner, Clara served them quietly. She listened as men discussed legislation and quoted lines from the Declaration of Independence. She heard them argue about liberty and property. She carried plates in and out of rooms where her own existence was debated in abstract terms. Sometimes the newspaper would be left unfolded on the table. She would glance at the dark rows of ink. They looked like ants marching across a page. Secret code. She began memorizing shapes. Not because anyone told her to, but because she felt something missing. Thomas returned from Charleston with ideas in his head and books under his arm. He was 24, tall, well-dressed, educated. He had spent years studying history, law, and commerce. He believed himself enlightened compared to older men in town. He spoke about progress. But progress had limits in South Carolina. He had read the Constitution. He had read the Declaration. He admired phrases about equality and rights. He argued in classrooms about morality. Yet he returned home to a household that owned people. It did not feel contradictory to him at first. It simply felt normal. Until one evening, Clara was dusting his study. The late afternoon light cut across the wooden floor. A book lay open on his desk. It was a collection of essays he had brought from Charleston. She paused. Her fingers hovered over the page, careful not to touch it. "You can't read that," Thomas said softly from the doorway. She turned. There was no anger in her expression. Only honesty. "I know," she replied, "but I want to know what it says." It was the tone that unsettled him. Not defiant, not pleading. Curious. He could have scolded her. He could have reminded her of the law. Instead, he asked, "Why?" She hesitated. Then she said the sentence that would follow him for the rest of his life. What does freedom look like on paper? He had never thought of freedom that way. He had spoken of it in essays, quoted it in debates, But he had never imagined someone asking what it looked like, how it appeared in ink, how the letters curved to form the word. He did not answer her that day, but that night, alone in his room, he opened a book and stared at the word liberty printed on a page. He realized something simple and unsettling. Freedom, to Clara, was invisible. The next evening, on his desk, he left a scrap of paper. One letter. A. It was reckless. Even writing that single letter for her could be considered a violation if discovered. But curiosity has its own gravity. When Clara entered the room, she saw the paper. She looked at him. He did not speak at first. He pointed. "A," he said finally. She repeated it softly. "A." He nodded. That was the first lesson. No dramatic speeches. No promises. Just a letter. The second night, there was another letter. Then another. They practiced quietly after the household slept. A single candle burned low. The study door remained slightly open so it would not appear locked. He showed her how each letter carried a sound. She absorbed it like dry ground absorbs rain. She practiced shaping letters with charcoal on scraps of cloth. She hid them beneath loose floorboards in the kitchen. Within weeks, letters became words. Cat, God, free, north. Each word opened something inside her. She began asking questions. What does this say? Why is that word longer? What does this mean? Thomas realized quickly that teaching someone to read is not just teaching shapes. It is inviting thought. And Clara thought deeply. One night, he showed her a line from the Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal. She sounded it out carefully. All men are created equal. She read it twice. Then she looked at him. If this is true, she asked quietly, why am I not? There it was. The danger, not rebellion. Logic. He had no answer that satisfied either of them. Their lessons began to feel less like instruction and more like conversation. He explained how laws were passed, how newspapers spread ideas, how abolitionists in places like Philadelphia were speaking openly against slavery. Her eyes widened when he described free black communities in the North. They can read, she asked. Yes. They can write their names? Yes. She was silent for a long time after that. Then she said, I want to write mine. He showed her how. C-L-A-R-A. She traced each letter slowly on scrap cloth. When she finished, she stared at it as though it were proof of existence. My name, she whispered. That moment changed everything. Because once a person can write their own name, they cannot easily be convinced they are property. But small towns do not keep secrets easily. One afternoon, Clara forgot to hide a folded scrap of paper in her apron. It slipped to the ground while she carried linens outside. A neighbor's wife saw the writing before Clara could retrieve it. An enslaved girl with handwriting. Whispers spread quickly. The merchant father began observing more closely. He noticed the candlelight in the study at late hours. He noticed Clara's posture changing. Confidence in her step. Confidence was dangerous. One evening, without knocking, he opened the study door. The candlelight revealed everything. The open book, the charcoal, the folded paper with Clara's careful letters. Silence filled the room like smoke. Clara was seized and pulled away. Thomas tried to step forward but was restrained. You will not disgrace this family for a servant, his father said coldly. Clara was not beaten publicly. That would have created talk. Instead, she was reassigned to field labor temporarily. Hard sun, long rows of crops, no access to books. Thomas was confined to the house, warned of legal consequences, reminded of state law. Teaching an enslaved person to read was a punishable offense. Fines, arrest, public humiliation. He had known the risk. Now he felt its weight. In the fields, Clara repeated letters in her mind. A, B, C. She whispered them under her breath while working. Knowledge once learned does not disappear easily. Weeks passed. Thomas tried to obey. He avoided the study. He avoided the shelves. But he could not forget her question. What does freedom look like on paper? He began studying legal codes quietly. He examined trade routes. He looked at shipping records. He realized something. His father's business moved goods north regularly. Crates, textiles, produce. Ships left for cities like Philadelphia. If someone were hidden among cargo, the plan was reckless. If discovered, he could face criminal charges. His father could disown him. The business could collapse. But silence felt heavier than danger. One evening at dusk, he walked toward the fields carrying a folded document. When Clara saw him, fear and hope flickered together. "I am sending you away," he whispered. Her heart pounded. To where? To the north, through trade shipments. Quietly, he handed her the folded paper. It was a manumission document, and signed but prepared. "I cannot give you freedom here," he said, "but I can give you a chance." She looked at him steadily. "You taught me what freedom looks like," she said. "Now I want to see it." The journey north was hidden and slow. She traveled in cramped space beneath goods. She barely moved during inspections. Every stop could mean discovery. Days blurred into darkness. Weeks later, she arrived in Philadelphia. Free soil, free ground, no overseer, no curfew bell. She stepped onto northern streets uncertain, but alive. Abolitionist networks helped her find shelter. She met teachers who believed literacy was power. She told them she already knew letters. They tested her. She read aloud slowly but clearly. They smiled. Within months, Clara was assisting in classrooms, helping newly freed children shape their first letters. She wrote her name boldly on paper. Clara. Every time she wrote it, she remembered the scrap of paper in a candlelit room. A. Thomas never followed. He remained in South Carolina, watched closely. His father kept him under strict supervision. His movements were monitored, his future controlled. Years passed. The nation moved toward war. In 1861, South Carolina seceded from the Union. Conflict spread. The Civil War reshaped the country. When emancipation finally came, literacy programs expanded across the South. Clara returned years later, not as property, but as a teacher. She carried books openly. She stood before children in a rebuilt classroom and wrote on a chalkboard without fear. Sometimes, alone at night, she thought of Thomas. She did not romanticize him. She understood the limits of his courage. But she also understood what he had risked. Love, in this story, was not dramatic escape through swamps. It was not gunfire or chains breaking. It was a candle burning after midnight. It was a letter written in secret. It was a question asked without bitterness. What does freedom look like on paper? The law once said teaching her to read was a crime. History would later call it courage. And in a society built on silence, the most dangerous act was not running. It was learning. It was thinking. It was writing your name and knowing it belonged to you. That is what freedom looked like on paper. And that is why it terrified those who tried to keep it hidden. If you have come this far, then you're a historian. Subscribe, cause we have more wonderful stories for you.